Hi, my name is Cheryl. In this last video in the second module in my series on general paper, I'll be covering some tips and tricks I personally found to be useful when I was studying for GP. This includes what I recommend you should try to do before the actual day of the paper, before you begin answering the comprehension paper, as well as things you should keep in mind as you're writing. Before the day of your actual exam, I would highly recommend that you constantly take note of current affairs and the latest news. This is especially important for news that might be related to or have an impact on Singapore society. General knowledge on these issues may come in handy as examples for your AQ. Also, in general, try to be more aware of other people's use of the English language. This might help expand your vocabulary and amass more synonyms that can help with paraphrasing in the paper. Another useful tip that can save some time and brain effort in the actual exam is to prepare and memorize some standard answers. This is especially useful for questions on the author's use of punctuation in the passage. Alright, let's take a look at some things I found to be helpful to keep in mind during the actual exam. The first thing I like to do when the exam begins is to skim through all the questions, including the summary and AQ. This allows me to get an idea of the key issue and topic of the passage, as well as be on the lookout for answers even while reading the passage for the first time. As such, this may augment the effectiveness and efficiency of your first reading of the passage. As you read the passage, I would highly suggest you using a pencil to annotate and mark out key concepts and various elements of reasoning. This will come in useful when you're finding points to use in the AQ. Also, I would like to immediately mark out the paragraphs for the summary so that I don't get confused about what paragraphs I'm supposed to summarize from later on. Specifically for the AQ, I prefer to pick up points in the passage that I want to address as soon as I read the passage for the first time. This is mainly so I have a greater peace of mind as that I've already planned out a bit of my AQ as I'm doing the rest of the short answer questions. Later on, when you do reach the AQ, it would be good if you can spare a minute or two to do a rough plan of your AQ before you write. This is so that you're able to write in a more concise and coherent manner. Additionally, when you finally get to the AQ, please read the question properly. I know it's often quite easy to assume that the question asks if you agree or disagree with the author's view of the passage, but this might not always be the case. Finally, now moving on to some things I found to be useful to do as I do the actual comprehension paper. The first and most obvious thing to keep in mind is, of course, to keep a clear mind. This allows you to read and digest each question properly and form a coherent and accurate response. As you answer the questions, my number one tip for you is to be conscious of your language use. Not only be conscious of your grammar, but also your diction and sentence structure. Avoid tacking on commas at the end of every sentence and adding on another phrase, as that would likely only cause your writing to be convoluted. This in turn would cost you language marks. Besides this, please try to paraphrase as much as possible, even for short answer questions. This will really help with your language marks. For the application question, however, I would suggest that you paraphrase the author's point only if you're confident about your paraphrasing skills and if you have enough time to accurately paraphrase it. Otherwise, you're better off just quoting the author. Another key issue that you should keep in mind, not just while you're answering the questions, is your time management. I usually try to set aside about 25 minutes for the summary and 35 minutes for the AQ. As such, since I would know what time my paper starts, I would calculate the exact time on the clock I would need to move on to the summary and the time I need to move on to the AQ. Don't spend too much time on a single question. Just keep moving on, and if you find yourself stuck at any question, just move on to the next question. And lastly, always make sure you're answering the question for your answers for every single question. Before I end off this video, let's take a look at the main points that we've discussed today. I've shared some things that I think might be helpful for you to do before the day of your paper, before you start answering the questions, as well as while you're doing the actual paper. Hopefully these tips were helpful for you. Thank you.